The U.S. economy is in great danger, with ever-increasing debt that is about to reach the debt barrel, and ever more extraordinary measures from the US Treasury to stop this rapid decline. The risk of a total collapse of the economy and the country as a whole may never have been as likely as now, if nothing is done about this. Some predict that the economy of the whole nation could shatter by the end of summer 2023, which is now just a few months away. In simple terms, the debt crisis refers to the fact that the United States government owes a massive amount of money to creditors, including foreign governments, institutions, and individuals. This debt has been accumulating over many years, and it now stands at over $31 trillion, which is an astounding sum of money. To combat this, the US Treasury has been taking extraordinary measures to ensure that the US can still pay its bills. But as of now, the problem is still growing, and if nothing is done about it, the US might have to default on its bills, which has never happened before in its entire history. This could have catastrophic consequences for the nation. But why is defaulting on these bills so truly catastrophic? The United States is one of the largest economies in the world, and its stability is critical to the global financial system. However, if the US were to default on its bills, it could have catastrophic impacts not only on its own economy, but also on the global financial system as a whole. Defaulting on its bills would mean that the US government would be unable to meet its financial obligations. This includes payments to creditors, such as foreign governments and investors, as well as payments to Social Security and Medicare recipients and salaries to government employees. This would have immediate and far-reaching effects on the US economy as well as the global financial system. Firstly, defaulting on its bills would lead to a sharp decrease in the value of the US dollar. The dollar is the world's reserve currency, meaning that it is used for international trade and is held by foreign governments as a store of value. If the US were to default on its bills, it would undermine confidence in the dollar and could lead to a rapid devaluation of the currency. This would make imports more expensive and reduce the purchasing power of US consumers, leading to inflation. Secondly, defaulting on its bills would lead to a rise in interest rates. The US government borrows money by selling Treasury bonds, which are backed by the full faith and credit of the US government. If the US were to default on its bills, investors would demand higher interest rates to compensate for the increased risk of lending to the US government. This would increase the cost of borrowing for everyone in the US, including individuals, businesses, and the government, and slow down economic growth. Thirdly, defaulting on its bills could lead to a financial crisis. Many financial institutions hold US Treasury bonds as a safe and reliable investment. If the US were to default on its bills, it could lead to a wave of bankruptcies and bank failures, as institutions that hold Treasury bonds would suffer significant losses. This could cause a domino effect, leading to a broader financial crisis that could spread throughout the global financial system. Finally, defaulting on its bills could lead to social and political unrest. If the government is unable to meet its obligations, it could lead to widespread protest, social unrest, and even political upheaval. This could further harm the economy, as investors may become even more wary of investing in the country. Now, to understand how the US government can stop this from happening, it is important to understand how we got here in the first place. The United States has been accumulating debt for decades, and the problem has only worsened over time. There are a variety of factors that have contributed to this situation, and there are also many potential solutions that could help address it. The history of the US debt dates back to the Revolutionary War, when the fledgling country first borrowed money to finance its fight for independence against Great Britain. Over time, the federal government continued to take on more debt as it funded new programs and initiatives. However, it was not until the 20th century that the US debt began to truly spiral out of control. One major factor that contributed to the growth of the US debt was the expansion of the welfare state during the mid-20th century. Programs such as Social Security and Medicare which were designed to provide financial assistance to older Americans, significantly increased the federal budget. In addition, the country's involvement in wars such as World War II and the Vietnam War also put a strain on the government's finances. This have all led to the U.S. having more and more debt crises, with the most recent being the debt crisis in 2021, where lawmakers decided to raise the debt ceiling to avoid defaulting. Another factor that has contributed to the growth of the U.S. debt is the country's reliance on foreign borrowing. Over the years, the federal government has borrowed money from foreign entities such as China and Japan, which has allowed it to finance its spending even when tax revenues fell short. However, this borrowing has also created a situation where the country's debt is increasingly held by foreign entities, which could create potential security risks down the line. So how can the U.S. debt problem be fixed? There are a number of potential solutions that have been proposed over the years. One option is to cut government spending across the board. This could include reducing the size of the military, cutting entitlement programs such as Social Security and Medicare, and eliminating subsidies for industries such as agriculture and energy. However, many of these proposals are politically unpopular, and there is significant debate over which programs should be cut and by how much. Another potential solution is to raise taxes on individuals and businesses. This could include increasing income tax rates, imposing new taxes on certain goods and services, and closing tax loopholes that benefit wealthy individuals and corporations. However, many people argue that raising taxes could have a negative impact on economic growth and job creation. Finally, some experts have suggested that the U.S. should consider a debt restructuring or forgiveness plan, similar to what has been done in other countries facing high levels of debt. This could involve renegotiating the terms of existing debt or even canceling some of it altogether. However, this option would likely be met with significant opposition from creditors and could damage the country's credit rating. The implications of this debt are far-reaching and potentially disastrous. One of the biggest problems is that the government's debt is a drain on the economy. As the government spends more money on interest payments to its creditors, it has less money to invest in the country's infrastructure, education, and social services. This can lead to a vicious cycle where the economy stagnates and the debt grows even larger. Another problem is that the debt crisis can cause inflation. When the government has to borrow money to pay its bills, it puts more money into circulation, which can drive up prices. This can lead to a decrease in the value of the dollar, which can hurt the economy by making imports more expensive and reducing the purchasing power of American consumers. Moreover, the debt crisis could negatively impact the United States' standing in the global economy. If the government is unable to pay its debts, it could lose credibility with its creditors and be seen as an unreliable borrower. This could make it more difficult for the government to borrow money in the future, which could lead to even more economic instability. The debt crisis could also lead to political and social unrest. If the government is unable to provide the services and support that Americans expect, there could be protest and civil unrest, which could further harm the economy and damage the country's reputation. Now the question is, will these extraordinary measures taken by the government have any chance of delaying financial turmoil before Congress can increase or suspend the debt limit? Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen stated in her letter that the extraordinary measures would continue until June 5th. However, she emphasized that there is significant uncertainty regarding the timing, as it's difficult to predict the amount of financial obligations the federal government must meet and the revenue it will generate in the coming months. Yellen called on lawmakers to act quickly. She also warned that the U.S. government could run out of money as early as in 1 month. We now heavily rely on Congress to make the right decision on this matter and stop catastrophic events from taking place. But before then, we must rely on the US Treasury to make the right decision on their extraordinary measures. But this begs the question, what are some of the extraordinary measures that could and may be taken? One of the most common extraordinary measures employed by the Treasury is known as extraordinary financing. This involves the government temporarily suspending investments in certain federal retirement funds, such as the Thrift Savings Plan, to free up cash to pay the government's bills. Essentially, the government borrows from these funds and promises to repay the money once the debt ceiling has been raised. Another measure used by the Treasury is known as the debt issuance suspension period. This involves suspending the sale of certain types of government bonds, which can help reduce the government's borrowing needs in the short term. This measure can be used to buy time for Congress to raise the debt ceiling, but it can also have negative consequences, such as higher borrowing costs for the government when the suspension is lifted. In addition to these measures, the Treasury has also employed cash management techniques to help manage its cash flow and prioritize its spending. For example, the Treasury can delay payments to certain government programs or vendors to ensure that it has enough cash on hand to pay more urgent bills, such as Social Security payments or interest on the national debt. It's worth noting that these extraordinary measures are not without their risks. In some cases, they can delay the need for Congress to raise the debt ceiling, but they can also create uncertainty and volatility in financial markets. Furthermore, these measures are not a long-term solution to the debt crisis and can only buy the government a limited amount of time before it must address the underlying problem. Ultimately, the only way to address the U.S. debt crisis is through a combination of spending cuts, tax increases, and other policy changes that can help reduce the government's borrowing needs over time. However, until such measures are enacted, the Treasury will likely continue to rely on extraordinary measures to manage the government's finances and avoid a potentially catastrophic default on its obligations. Debt barrel is a term used to describe the point at which a country's debt load becomes unsustainable. It is a metaphorical image of a barrel that is being filled with debt, and once the barrel becomes too full, it overflows and causes negative consequences. In the case of a country, reaching the debt barrel could have significant negative effects on the economy and the population as a whole. When a country reaches the debt barrel, it means that its debt has become too large to manage and the government is unable to pay its debts. This could lead to default on loans, which can have serious consequences for the economy. One of the biggest negative effects of reaching the debt barrel is that it can lead to an economic crisis. If the government is unable to pay its debts, investors may lose confidence in the country's economy, which can lead to a sharp drop in the value of the country's currency. This, in turn, can lead to inflation as imports become more expensive and the cost of living increases. Another negative effect of reaching the debt barrel is that it can lead to a reduction in government services. If the government is unable to borrow money to finance its operations, it may have to cut spending on essential services such as healthcare, education, and social welfare programs. This can have a significant impact on the population, particularly those who are most vulnerable, such as the elderly, children, and low-income individuals. Reaching the debt barrel can also lead to a decrease in the country's credit rating. When a country's debt load becomes too large, credit rating agencies may downgrade the country's credit rating, which can make it more expensive for the country to borrow money in the future. This can further exacerbate the debt crisis and make it even more difficult for the country to recover. Another negative effect of reaching the debt barrel is that it can lead to political instability. If the government is unable to manage its debt, it may lead to protests, social unrest, and even political upheaval. This can further harm the economy as investors may become even more wary of investing in the country. The future may look grim for now, and all we can do is hope that the lawmakers make the right decisions on this matter. But even if this problem is solved, it doesn't change the fact that the US dollar is losing its power on the world stage. Click here to watch a video about the weakening US dollar, or click here for a random video.